still got a lot of work to do on this family.
Money, money. As Nancy reflected on her plan, another idea occurred to her. She was sure that Bess and George would love the chance to spend a vacation on a farm, since they had both mentioned it the other day. Nancy did some mental arithmetic and came to the conclusion that 3 steady boarders who paid their bills regularly might help to lessen the amount of the mortgage interest payments that threatened Redgate, and also keep Mrs. Bird from selling the place. Nancy thought, I hope Dad agrees to my making the trip. That evening at dinner, Mr. Drew said, I'll be out of town for a week or 2. Nancy, do you think you can get some of your friends to stay with you? I have an even better idea, Nancy replied, and smiled. She outlined her plan to help Joanne Bird. Her father consented enthusiastically, proud as always of Nancy's desire to assist others. It was not so easy to convince Bess and George when Nancy telephoned them. They both wanted to help Joanne and agreed that a week or 2 in the country would be very pleasant, but there were complications. If George went, it meant she would lose out on a camping trip. Bess had planned to visit an aunt in Chicago, but admitted the trip could be postponed. There's one thing about it, George said laughingly as she finally agreed to give up the camping trip. I've never been with you yet that we didn't run into an adventure or a mystery. Maybe a trip to Redgate will be exciting. Bess and George had no trouble in getting their parents' consent. It was decided that Nancy would pick up Joanne first, then come back for the cousins, since River Heights was on the way to Round Valley. Nancy packed her clothes that night after telephoning the plans to Joanne. As she was closing the suitcase, her eyes fell upon a copy of the coded message which lay on the dressing table. Better take it along and work on it whenever I have a chance, she decided. Nancy got up early the next morning and had breakfast with her father. After exchanging fond goodbyes with Hannah, she turned to her car. It was close to 10 o'clock when Nancy reached Riverside Heights. She stopped at a downtown service station and had her convertible filled with gas and checked for oil. Then she drove to Joanne's boarding house. Whoa, that's another time and place when you could have them check your car for oil at the gas station. Her passenger was waiting. Nancy was glad to find that Joanne seemed to be in better spirits. It'll be such fun, all of us going together, Joanne said, and I know Graham will be happy to have you stay as long as you like. Only on the condition that we are paying guests, Nancy insisted. We'll see about that later, Joanne said, smiling. They put her suitcase into the trunk of the car and soon were on their way back to River Heights. Assured by Joanne they would be welcome at Redgate, the cousins brought out their suitcases and put them in the luggage compartment. George took Nancy aside and said excitedly, A little while ago a man phoned here and asked for Miss Fain. When I answered, he said, Listen, miss, tell that snoopy friend of yours to stop her snooping or she'll be sorry. Then he hung up without giving his name. Nancy set her jaw and smiled. Whoever he is, he has a guilty conscience, so my suspicions were well-founded. Who do you think he is? George asked. Either the man on the train who followed me there, or his accomplice of his, either the man on the train who followed me here, or some accomplice of his. I'm glad for your sake we're going away, Nancy stated George. Let's not say anything about this to Joe, Nancy advised, as she and George walked back to the car. It's a perfect day for our trip to the country, Joanne said excitedly. George could see by the expression on Joanne's face that a visit to Redgate Farm with her new friends was far more important to her than any other plans the girls might have had. I agree 100%, George answered happily as she stepped into the car. And I'll be so glad to get out of this heat. Bess chimed in with a sigh. I spent practically the whole night dreaming about the cool, refreshing breezes in the country. As Nancy steered the convertible in the direction of Round Valley, she said with an eager smile, We're off to rescue Redgate Farm. Nancy and her friends thoroughly enjoyed the scenic route to Round Valley. They stopped for a quick lunch and then continued their drive. The winding roads led through cool groves and skirted sparkling little lakes. Each hilltop brought a different and beautiful view. Gradually, the worried expression completely left Joanne's eye, and the color came into her thin face. She began to laugh heartily at the antics of Bess and George. As they rode along, she told the girls a great deal about her home. You'll like Redgate, I'm sure, she said enthusiastically. We haven't any riding horses, but there will be plenty of other things to do. We can explore the caves, for one thing. Caves? Bess questioned with interest. How exciting. What kind is it? A home for bears or a pirate's den? Joanne laughed. There's a large cavern located on the farm. No one knows how it came to be there, but we think it must have made a long time ago by an underground river. You must have explored it before this, Nancy exclaimed. Oh, yes, of course, though I'll admit I never did very thoroughly, and I haven't been near the cave for years. As a child, I was always afraid of the place. It looked so dark and gloomy. Lately, I've been too busy working on the farm. We'll have to put that at the top of our list, George declared. I love spooky things. Well, I'm not sure I do, Bess admitted. Nancy laughed. We may even find hidden treasure in the walls. I wish you could, Joanne sighed. It certainly would come in handy. The hours passed quickly as the travelers alternately sang and chatted. Why, it's almost 4 o'clock, George announced in surprise. By the way, just so you know, that little bit about the cave, anytime something gets stuck in a story all by itself in the middle of something else, it's called foreshadowing. Something's going to happen in that cave. The hours quickly passed as the travelers alternately sang and chatted. Why, it's almost 4 o'clock. We've made good time, Nancy remarked. Bess spoke up plaintively. I'm half starved. It's been ages since lunch. I could go for a gooey sundae. The others laughed but agreed they were hungry too. Let's watch for a roadside stand, Nancy proposed. I'll have to stop soon for gas anyway. We'll come to one soon, Joanne spoke up. We're in Round Valley now. A few minutes later, she pointed out a combination filling station and lunchroom, which looked clean and inviting. Nancy turned the convertible into the driveway and parked out of the way of the other drivers who might want to stop for gasoline. The group entered the lunchroom and took seats at one of the small white tables. They all decided on chocolate nut sundaes topped with whipped cream. I haven't had dinner yet. That sounds good. Here goes another pound, Beth sighed as she gave her order, but I'd rather be pleasantly plump than give up sundaes. Though there were few customers in the room, the women in charge, who also did the serving, were extremely slow in filling the orders. Twice, Nancy glanced at her watch. If you'll excuse me, she said, I'll step outside and get the gas. It'll save us a little time in getting started. Don't wait for me if our sundaes come. She drove the car over to the pump and asked the attendant to fill the tank. Before he could do so, however, a large, high-powered sedan pulled up to the other pump, coming to an abrupt stop almost parallel to Nancy's car. Give me 5 and make it snappy, a voice called out impatiently. The attendant glanced inquiringly at Nancy. Drew, do you mind? He asked. Wait on them first, if you like, she said graciously. Nancy observed the passengers with interest. There were 3 rather coarse-looking men accompanied by a woman. Nancy could not see the face of the driver, for it was turned away from her car, but suddenly he opened the door of his car. I'm going inside and get a couple of bottles of ginger ale, she heard him grumble to his companions. As he stepped from the automobile and turned, Nancy saw his face. He was the mysterious man who had spoken to her the day before on the train. In view of the telephone call George had received, Nancy did not wish to be observed, so she turned her head quickly, leaned down, and pretended to be studying a road map. I hope he doesn't recognize me, Nancy thought, or see my license plate. To her relief, the man walked in front of the convertible without a sideward glance. At that moment, the woman alighted and walked toward the lunchroom, passing close to Nancy's car. She was tall and slender with blonde hair that was almost shoulder length. Nancy's attention was suddenly arrested when she detected on the stranger a familiar scent. Blue jade perfume. Remember that? That's another thing. When a chapter starts out with something weird, it's going to come back. After the driver and the blonde woman had entered the lunchroom, Nancy gazed at the 2 men who remained in the automobile. They were the sort Carson Drew would describe as tough customers. The blonde woman soon reappeared and got back into the sedan. Then the driver came out carrying the cold drinks. Without looking in Nancy's direction, he addressed the attendant harshly. Say, ain't you finished yet? He turned to one of the men in the car and handed him the bottles of ginger ale. Hold these, will you, Hank? I got to pay this bird. Nancy started. The man in room 805, or I guess 305, called one of his friends Hank over the telephone, she said to herself. Could this be the person? Her attention was drawn back to the driver who was paying the attendant. He took a thick roll of bills out from his pocket and with a careless gesture peeled off a $10 bill. Aren't you afraid to carry such a wad around, sir? The attendant questioned, gazing admiringly at the thick roll. The driver laughed boisterously. Plenty more where these come from, eh, Hank? You bet. My roll makes his look like a flat tire. Just feast your eyes on this. He flashed an even larger roll of bills in the amazed attendant's direction. The filling station man shrugged. I'll have to go inside to get your change. The moment he disappeared, the third man in the car muttered to his companions, You fools! Do you want to make him suspicious? Pipe down. He spoke in a low tone, but the wind carried his voice in Nancy's direction. Maurice is right, the driver admitted. The fellow is only a cornball, but we can't be too careful. The attendant returned with the change. The driver pocketed it and drove off without another word. Nancy instinctively noted the license number of the car. On impulse, she went to a phone booth and dialed her friend, Chief McGinnis of River Heights Police Department. I'll ask him to let me know who owns both the Sedan Anne and the foreign-make car that slowed down at George's house, she determined. Then I'll find out about the driver, the woman wearing the blue jade, the men named Maurice and Hank, and maybe the man in room 305. Chapter 5. Do we have a picture here? Not a single picture. Okay. A worrisome journey. Some class, eh? The attendant remarked Nancy as she came back to her car. Must be millionaires. Or racketeers, Nancy thought. As soon as her gas tank was filled, she paid the bill and hurried back into the lunchroom. The girls already had been served. What took you so long, Bess asked. Another car drove up and I had to wait, Nancy answered simply. She sat down, thoughtfully eating her sundae. What's the matter with you, George demanded presently. You hardly said a word since you sat down. Nancy looked around and saw that no one was seated near the table. In whispers, she told what had happened. Oh, dear, said Bess. Maybe that man on the train found out where we're going and is on his way out there, too. Don't be silly, George chided her cousin. If he's in some shady deal around River Heights, he'll be glad to have our young sleuth out of the way. Joanne looked a bit worried, but all she said was, I think we'd better be on our way. I have to be there before that man comes to buy the farm. I must talk Graham out of it. The girls finished the sundaes and picked up their checks, but Nancy insisted on paying. I want to break this $20 bill Dad gave me, she said. I've spent most of my smaller bills. The waitress changed the bill for her without comment, and the girl left the lunchroom. As they climbed into the car, Nancy glanced anxiously at the sky. Apparently, Fizz thinks that he needs to join in this reading session. There was a dark overcast in the west. It does look like rain over my way, Joanne observed, and we leave the paved road and take a dirt one about 5 miles from the farm. I'm afraid it's going to be a race against time, Nancy warned, starting the car. A bad storm on the dirt road won't help matters at all. The girls now noticed a change in the countryside. The hills had become steeper and the valleys deeper. The farms dotting the landscape were attractive. Nancy made fast time, for she was bent on beating the storm. The sky became gloomier and overcast. Soon the first raindrops appeared on the windshield. We're in for a downpour, all right, Nancy declared grimly as she turned onto the dirt road. Soon there was thunder and lightning, and the rain came down in torrents. Listen to that wind, Bess exclaimed. It's enough to blow us off the road. The next moment, everyone groaned in dismay as Nancy braked the car. Across the road stood a wooded blockade on the sign. Detour, bridge under repair. George read it aloud in disgust. An arrow on the sign indicated a narrow road to the right. As Nancy made the turn, Joanne gave a sigh. Oh dear, she said, this back way will take us much longer to reach Red Gate. The detour led through a woodland of tall trees. Daylight had been blotted out entirely, and even with the car's headlights on full, Nancy could barely see ahead. Again, she was forced to slow down. Suddenly, a jagged streak of lightning hit a big oak a short distance from the car. It splintered the tree. Ah! Screamed Bess. This is terrible! Nancy pretended to be calm, but she was really very much worried. She decided it would be safer to get away from the dangerous line of trees, any one of which might crash down on them. How long is this stretch of wood? She asked Joanne. Oh, perhaps 500 feet. We'll have to chance it. Nancy drove as quickly as she dared in the darkness. The girls breathed sighs of relief when the open country was reached. But Joanne's fears were not yet over. Watch out, she advised. There's a sharp, treacherous curve very soon, just before we take the turnoff for the farm. By now, the brief storm had moved off to a distant sky, and it was easier to see the boundaries of the slippery road. Nancy rounded a curve, but as the car took the turn, the wheels on the right side sank into the thick mud of a ditch, bringing the car to a lurching halt. The unexpected mishap stunned the girls for a moment. Finally, Bess found her voice. Now what? Nancy endeavored to drive the car out of the ditch, but it was useless. Well, she sighed, we may as well jump out and examine the car. Keep your fingers crossed. They found the convertible at a lopsided angle. The right wheels, however, were firmly anchored by the mud. The four girls attempted to push the car, but without success. I'll look in the trunk, Nancy said, to see if there's something to help us. Nancy found 2 pieces of heavy burlap. Bess and George put them in front of the 2 back wheels for traction. Then they gathered and broke some bush to make a mat for each tire. I hope this worked, Joanne said, taking her place to assist in pushing the car. There probably won't be anyone else using this desolate road who could help us. And I'm afraid we won't reach the farm in time. Nancy stepped onto the car and started the motor, easing the gas slowly and rocking the convertible back and forth. Inch by inch, the tires crept forward, finally catching on the burlap and brush and rolling out of the ditch. We've done it, Bess shouted proudly. With a little outside help, George patted with a grin. The girls laughed from sheer relief. They started off again more slowly than before, but they had gone only a mile when a new storm seemed to be coming up. In less than 5 minutes, complete darkness descended again, bringing another deluge of rain. Deafening thunderclaps instantly followed vivid forks of lightning. Of necessity, Nancy once more kept the automobile at a snail's pace. It was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Anxiously, Joanne kept glancing at her watch. It's 5:15, she announced nervously. Nancy tried to assuage the worried girl's fears. This storm may have delayed your grandmother's caller. The wind and rain continued unabated as the convertible climbed the brow of a hill. There was a brilliant flash of lightning. George, who was seated in front with Nancy, screamed, "Don't hit her!" Nancy jammed on the brakes so quickly that the rear of the car skidded round sideways on the road. Who? She demanded, horrified. The woman in the road. Didn't you see her? Maybe she's under the car. Heartsick, Nancy jumped out of one door, Bess another. They peered under the car alongside it, in back of it. They could see no one. Are you sure you saw a woman? Nancy inquired. Just then another streak of lightning illuminated the sky, and Bess called out, There goes someone running across that field. Nancy glanced quickly in that direction, and she saw the running figure of a woman. At that same time, the woman looked back over her shoulder, revealing a thin, haggard face. Nancy judged her to be in her early 50s. All 4 girls stared in mystification. Nancy and Bess returned to the car, and the journey was resumed. Why would any sane person be walking in such a storm? Bess spoke up finally. She's headed in the direction of the cavern, said Joanne, and explained that they were now nearing the farm. Maybe she's one of those strange people over there. Nancy and her friends were immediately curious. Before they could ask what Joanne meant, the car reached the crest of a steep hill, and Joanne cried out, There's Redgate Farm. She pointed to the valley below them. The storm had let up, and the sun was coming out. The River Heights girls could clearly see the 40-acre farm with its groves of pine trees and a winding river which curled along the valley. Everything looked green and fresh after the heavy rains. It's beautiful, exclaimed Bess. And cool and peaceful, Joanne added excitedly. Don't count on much relaxation with Nancy around, George advised her new friend. She'll find some adventure to occupy every waking hour. Yes, Bess agreed. Adventure with mystery, she added. Nancy smiled. She reflected on the 2 mysteries she already had encountered, the unsolved case of the blue jade perfume and the strange code. As the car descended into the valley, the girls caught a better glimpse of the farm with its huge red barn and various adjoining sheds and the large rambling house partly covered with vines. There were bright red geraniums in the window boxes and freshly painted picket fence surrounding the yard. Nancy stopped the car in front of the big red gate, which opened on the garden. Oh, I hope it's not too late, Joanne cried as she sprang out to unlatch the gate. More coming later. Bye.